The paradox. From billions to nothing. There's a face that made people run away in fear. Not a monster, not an accident victim, but the result of $4 million and 7 plastic surgeries. But in 1977, this same woman stood in the middle of the Kenyan savannah, blonde hair blowing in the wind, eyes bright, holding a hunting rifle like a warrior goddess. 20 years later, she walked away from her divorce with $2.5 billion, a world record, then died in a Paris hotel room with $0 in her bank account. This isn't a story about money. This is a story about a strong woman who turned herself into a victim. The question is, what was she so afraid of that she was willing to trade her own face to keep a man who didn't love her? The Swiss girl with big dreams. Before the tabloids and the billions, she was Jocelyn Alice Wildenstein, born in 1940 in the quiet landscapes of Lausanne, Switzerland. Her early years with her father, a sporting goods buyer, and her mother, a housewife, gave no hint of the billionaire socialite she would become. But Jocelyn was never content with a quiet life. At 17, dating a film producer introduced her to a world of glamour beyond the modest confines of her hometown. She soon moved to Paris, thriving in the center of European sophistication. Dating filmmaker Sergio Gobi, she proved she wasn't just a pretty face. She learned to fly planes and became a skilled hunter, pursuits rare for women of her time. As she moved through elite circles, whispers linked her to the famous Madame Claude, but Jocelyn always denied them. By her mid-30s, she possessed the poise of someone destined for grander things. Yet, her heart remained captured by a childhood dream, the vast, wild open spaces of Africa. The lion hunt that changed everything. In 1977, an invitation from arms dealer Adnan Khashoggi led Jocelyn to a shooting weekend at Old Jogi, a 66,000-acre ranch in Kenya belonging to the powerful Wildenstein art dynasty. There, she met Alec Wildenstein, heir to a staggering fortune. Their first encounter was mythic. Alec was tracking a problem lion, and Jocelyn, the fearless hunter from Paris, tagged along. She impressed him immediately, not just with her beauty, but with her fearlessness and skill with a rifle. A motorcycle ride and a first kiss among the acacia trees soon followed. Back in Paris, Alec filled a room with white orchids to win her heart. Within weeks, she left her boyfriend, and after only 4 dates, they eloped to Las Vegas in 1978. But a shadow loomed over the fairy tale. Alec's father, Daniel Wildenstein. A patriarch who ruled the art world and his family with an iron fist, Daniel made his disapproval of Jocelyn clear. Despite his efforts to pull them apart and his demand for absolute obedience, Alec defied him. The newlyweds settled into an unimaginable life of luxury, dividing time between French chateaux, Caribbean estates, and a massive Manhattan townhouse filled with rare masterpieces. Paradise in Kenya. Jocelyn poured her passion into managing Old Jogi, turning it into a world unto itself. With over 200 buildings and 300 servants, the ranch operated at a cost that meant nothing to the Wildensteins. She oversaw millions in renovations, importing white rhinos and building bulletproof enclosures for tigers. The estate even featured a private runway and a unique bedroom chalet perched atop rock formations with a lagoon swimming pool. Old Jogi became Jocelyn's masterpiece, a blend of extreme luxury and raw African beauty. For the Swiss girl from modest beginnings, it was the culmination of every dream. During these years, they had 2 children, Diane and Alec Jr. Jocelyn seemed to have it all: a powerful husband, beautiful children, and the status of a gracious hostess who could fly her own plane. She moved between Manhattan high society and the Kenyan wilds with ease. But beneath this gilded surface, the first cracks were already beginning to form. The prison of privilege. Most people view extreme wealth as the ultimate freedom. I call it the ultimate vulnerability. When you have 300 people serving your every whim, you don't just gain luxury, you lose your autonomy. Jocelyn later admitted in court that she had no idea how to light a stove, toast bread, or boil an egg. She lived in that gilded cage so long, she forgot the basic mechanics of being human. Think about your own home. Being able to feed yourself isn't just a chore, it's independence, it's dignity. Jocelyn traded that dignity for a life where she was purely decorative. When the money eventually vanished, she wasn't just broke, she was as helpless as a child who had never learned to survive. The shadow of Daniel Wildenstein. The Wildenstein empire was ruled by Daniel, a patriarch who controlled everything from the family business to his son's loyalties. Alec, caught between a domineering father and a new wife Daniel despised, began to drift into depression. As the years passed, the warmth of the marriage cooled, and Alec looked for escape in other faces and other rooms. Jocelyn noticed his wandering eye, but she also noticed his growing fascination with the predatory grace of the lynxes and tigers at their Kenyan ranch. It was here she made a fatal calculation. If Alec loved big cats, she would become one to keep him. It sounds absurd, but to a woman losing her grip on love, transforming herself into something exotic felt like her only weapon. The first surgery, the door that never closed. It began innocuously in 1979, with his and hers eye lifts. But for Jocelyn, that first surgery was a door that would never close. She returned to the surgeon again and again, reshaping her eyes into a feline slant and pumping her face with collagen. At least 7 facelifts followed, each costing up to $500,000. Driven by the paralyzing fear of not being young enough, she treated her skin like fabric to be stretched and adjusted. The irony was brutal. Instead of attraction, Alec reacted with horror. He warned her that skin has limits, but Jocelyn wouldn't listen. She was desperately investing in a marriage that was already emotionally bankrupt, convinced that the next procedure would finally be the one to bring him home. The reaction. Alec's reaction was visceral. He reportedly screamed in horror, comparing her approach to treating a face like a piece of furniture to be rearranged. He warned her that skin isn't fabric, it has biological limits. But to Jocelyn, every incision was a desperate investment, a frantic attempt to buy back a love that had already left the room. The world recoiled as her appearance reached the extreme. Patients supposedly fled waiting rooms in fear, and doctors struggled because her skin was pulled so tight she could barely blink. By the mid-90s, she had become a feline phantom, swollen, unnatural, and deeply unsettling. $4 million later, the result was the opposite of what she craved. It pushed Alec even further away. Yet Jocelyn retreated into a Nyatu Kwasu Funyang, fortress of denial. She spent the rest of her life insisting her distorted features were merely Swiss heritage and good lighting. She wore that lie as firmly as her surgical mask, refusing to admit that the woman she used to be was gone forever. The mirror that lies. Have you ever looked in the mirror and thought, if I just changed this one thing, everything would be better? We've all felt that voice saying you're not quite good enough. Jocelyn listened to it every day. But here is the cruel truth. When you start changing yourself to please someone else, you can never change enough. Alec didn't stop loving Jocelyn because of her eyes. He was a man caught in his father's shadow, seeking escape in conquest. No amount of surgery could fix a man who wasn't capable of giving love. In the process, Jocelyn lost the one thing she could never get back, herself. There is a rare photograph of her staring at her reflection with an expression of pure horror. The woman staring back was a stranger. The betrayal revealed. The real tragedy wasn't her face. It was that Alec had moved on decades ago. By 1989, it was revealed he had been having multiple affairs since the 3rd year of their marriage. Jocelyn heard the rumors and saw the signs. The unexplained trips, the way he looked through her rather than at her. But instead of demanding the kekwan, objective truth, Jocelyn would retreat to her bathroom, look in the mirror and ask, "What am I still missing?" Then she would call her surgeon. She believed somewhere in the catalog of procedures was a miracle that would bring back the man who had kissed her in Kenya. But that man was long gone. By 1997, they were just 2 strangers living in separate worlds within the same enormous houses. The night, everything fell apart. In September 1997, just weeks after her father passed away, Alec told Jocelyn the marriage was over. Suspecting the truth, Jocelyn returned to their Manhattan townhouse with bodyguards. What she found in her own bedroom was a scene of chaos. Alec, a naked young blonde, and a confrontation that resulted in the police being called. Alec Wildenstein, the billionaire art dealer, spent that night in custody. A judge barred him from their home, and Jocelyn filed for divorce immediately. It was the beginning of one of the most contentious and publicly messy legal battles in history. The price of discovery. Picture this moment for a second. A woman who has spent 15 years, 7 surgeries, $4 million, and countless hours of pain and recovery, trying to transform herself into what her husband wanted. And in one night, she discovers it was all for nothing. All those cat eyes, all that collagen, all those lifted cheeks and reshaped bones, and he's still in bed with someone else, someone younger, someone who hasn't had any surgery at all. That's the moment Jocelyn finally understood the truth. The problem was never her face. The problem was that she was trying to hold on to someone who was determined to let go. How many of us have been there? Not with plastic surgery maybe, but with that desperate attempt to change ourselves for someone else's approval. Trying to become thinner, funnier, quieter, louder, whatever we think they want. And then discovering that no amount of change will ever be enough. Because the issue wasn't us, it was them. The divorce that made headlines. The divorce proceedings lasted nearly 2 years, turning into a global media circus. The Wildenstein family, who had built a dynasty on shadows and secrecy, suddenly found their private finances splashed across every newspaper. The public became obsessed with the scale of their excess: $60,000 phone bills, $1 million monthly spending, and $10 million shopping sprees at Cartier. As Jocelyn's lawyers laid bare the costs of maintaining multiple estates and staff salaries, the world watched with a mixture of fascination and disgust. But the real target of the media's hunger was Jocelyn's appearance. Columnists and tabloids, never kind to women who deviate from the norm, had a field day. She was dubbed the Bride of Wildenstein, Catwoman, and the Lion Queen. Cruel headlines compared her to science fiction characters, and late-night comedians turned her pain into a punchline. This pervasive mockery became so normalized that few bothered to look for the human being hidden behind the surgically altered face. The battle turned even darker within the family dynamics. Alec retaliated by claiming Jocelyn had worked as a courtesan in Paris for the infamous Madame Claude. Though she denied it vehemently, the scandal only added fuel to the fire. The Wildensteins then moved to strip her of everything. They changed the combinations to the safes and ordered the staff at Old Jogi to ignore her. But here's the cruelest part. Jocelyn's own mother was living at the ranch at the time, suffering from Alzheimer's disease. In an act of unthinkable coldness, Jocelyn was barred from visiting her. The woman who had poured her heart and millions into turning Old Jogi into a paradise was now treated as an intruder in her own home. Patriarch Daniel Wildenstein was furious that their secretive art empire and tax-avoiding offshore accounts were being exposed in open court. However, Jocelyn held a weapon they hadn't fully prepared for. After 20 years in the inner circle, she knew exactly where the money was buried. The woman who knew too much. Jocelyn wasn't just a wife. After 2 decades, she was a threat. She had managed properties, overseen million-dollar renovations, and seen documents the Wildenstein family never intended for public eyes. She understood the gears of their financial empire, the offshore accounts, the tax-avoiding art transfers, and the secretive trusts. The family's greatest fear was a forensic accounting in an American courtroom that could turn their privacy into a criminal liability. Jocelyn held that power, and because of it, they settled big. In 1999, when the divorce was finalized, Jocelyn walked away with a lump sum of $2.5 billion. Some sources even claim $3.8 billion, plus $100 million a year for the next 13 years. It was a historic settlement that redefined the cost of an elite divorce. However, the money came with an extraordinary, almost humiliating stipulation from the judge. Jocelyn was legally forbidden from using any of that money for further cosmetic surgery. She was even advised to buy a microwave. A sharp, condescending reminder that after a lifetime of being served, she didn't even know how to cook a basic meal. But the most poignant detail of that day wasn't the billions or the stipulations. It was the silence in the courtroom. Jocelyn sat completely alone. Her children, Diane and Alec Jr., had sided with their father, creating a rift that would never fully heal. She walked away with $2.5 billion, but she lost her 2 children. The golden shackles. Think about the irony of that courtroom moment. The judge essentially told Jocelyn, "You're one of the wealthiest women in the world now, but you're too incompetent to manage your own face. You need to be protected from yourself." That's not freedom. That's a different kind of prison. Money wasn't power anymore. It was a restraint, a reminder of her failure to change who she was into what someone else wanted. And her children? They chose their father's side. They would go on to live their own lives. Diane in London, breeding racehorses, an interest she inherited from her father. Alec Jr. took over management of Old Jogi, which had been turned into a luxury resort and conservation area. Years later, when Jocelyn faced financial troubles, she would blame her daughter Diane for not helping her. But by then, the divide was too deep to cross. By 2023, Jocelyn would admit in an interview that she hadn't seen her grandchildren since the eldest was 3 years old. That kind of isolation, for all her money and fame, must have been devastating. While many of us worry about leaving an inheritance for our children, about making sure they're provided for, Jocelyn couldn't even buy a phone call from hers. That's not wealth. That's poverty of the deepest kind. Poverty of connection. Poverty of love. Freedom in the search for love. After the divorce, Jocelyn sold her Manhattan townhouse for $13 million, attempting to reclaim her life. She claimed to have found freedom, finally escaping the program set by the Wildenstein family to live on her own terms. She embraced her notoriety, traveling and attending elite events, yet the estrangement from her children remained a wound that no amount of cash could heal. In 2003, at New York Fashion Week, she met Lloyd Klein, a fashion designer 20 years her junior. They connected through a mutual obsession with extravagant style and a refusal to apologize for their public image. Their relationship would last more than 2 decades, but it was far from a fairy tale. Their bond was notoriously volatile. In 2016, a domestic dispute at Trump World Tower led to both being arrested and facing restraining orders. Somehow, they always reconciled through grand, material gestures. After one particularly violent encounter, Lloyd gifted her a 200-carat emerald and diamond apology ring. In 2017, he proposed at the Versace mansion in Miami, a setting that mirrored their shared love for gilded excess. However, beneath the surface of jewels and proposals, the atmosphere was changing. Friends whispered that their frequent fights were shifting toward a new subject: money. Despite the massive settlement, Jocelyn's billions were unraveling in a way that would soon shock the world. The disappearing billions. By the early 2000s, the unthinkable happened. The mirage of infinite wealth began to evaporate. A settlement that should have fueled 1,000 lifetimes was unraveling. In 2015, the Wildenstein family abruptly stopped her annual $100 million payments, claiming the trust was empty. Jocelyn called it an embargo, a deliberate act of punishment following Alec's death in 2008. That same year, the woman who once spent millions without blinking was sued for a mere $70,000 in credit card debt and unpaid rent. By 2018, the aura had officially met the abyss. Jocelyn filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy, shockingly claiming she had $0 in her bank account. The court filings laid bare a haunting reality. $16.39 million in tangible assets were weighed down by $6.38 million in liabilities. Among her debts was a stinging $268,000 owed to Regal Jewelry for unreturned gems, plus $75,928 in interest. When she failed to pay, the law moved in. By October 2023, a judge issued a writ authorizing law enforcement to ensure she complied or faced arrest. The physical symbols of her status fell next. In 2020, her 3 apartments in Trump Tower were repossessed. In her late 70s, the Catwoman was living in a Miami Beach apartment, facing potential legal consequences and the crushing question: how does a billionaire go broke? Some blamed spending habits that never adapted to a dwindling tap. Others pointed to astronomical legal fees and bad investments. But the Wildensteins were sinking too. In 2024, Alec's brother, Guy Wildenstein, was convicted of a $600 million tax fraud and money laundering scheme, sentenced to 4 years in prison. It seems the entire dynasty was built on a foundation as secretive and troubled as Jocelyn's own finances. Most people would have vanished into the shadows of such a public collapse, but Jocelyn was about to orchestrate a second act that no one saw coming. A late life renaissance. Despite her financial ruin, the final chapter of Jocelyn's life brought an unexpected twist. The woman who had been mocked for decades suddenly became celebrated. High-fashion publications like Paper and Interview magazine began featuring her in glossy shoots, treating her not as a cautionary tale, but as a fascinating icon of persistence. The cultural lens had shifted. What was once ridiculed as grotesque was now reclaimed as avant-garde. Even as she was broke, Jocelyn maintained her gaudy glamour, remaining entirely unapologetic about her choices. This defiance, combined with her tumultuous bond with Lloyd Klein, turned her into a campy icon of sorts. She was imitated in the front rows of Paris Fashion Week and amassed over 1 million Instagram followers, fascinated by her otherworldly appearance. On social media, she would occasionally share vintage photos of her natural beauty, creating a startling contrast she never publicly acknowledged. She embraced her Catwoman identity, while still insisting that Swiss heritage, not surgeons, was responsible for her face. In her later years, Jocelyn opened up more than ever before. She claimed her decades of silence were meant to protect her children during their youth. But now, estranged from them, she felt free to speak about the life she had built and lost. There was a wistfulness in her reflections, the voice of someone looking back on a grand adventure that had turned into a tragedy. She and Lloyd even discussed a reality show, determined to capitalize on their drama and fame. She never stopped attending runway shows or posing for photographers, refusing, until the very end, to disappear quietly into obscurity. On New Year's Eve, December 31st, 2024, Jocelyn and Lloyd were in Paris, the city where her grand adventure had really begun decades ago. They were staying at a hotel. They had plans to celebrate the holiday that evening, but first, they decided to take a nap. Lloyd woke up around dusk. Jocelyn didn't. She had passed away in her sleep from a pulmonary embolism. She was 84 years old. Lloyd announced her passing to the press, calling her an icon and expressing shock at her sudden departure. The news spread quickly through social media and entertainment outlets. Tributes poured in from fans, fellow socialites, and people in the fashion world who had come to admire her resilience. Whatever else could be said about Jocelyn Wildenstein, she had lived life on her own terms, or at least she had tried to. The deeper tragedy. The tragedy of Jocelyn Wildenstein transcends the headlines. It is not just about the worldwide mockery or the lost billions. It is a story of a warrior goddess who slowly turned herself into a victim. Born a natural beauty, a woman who could fly planes and hunt in the African savannah, she made one fatal mistake. She believed that changing her face could change how a man felt about her. The psychology is heartbreaking. The idea that you are never quite enough, and that one more procedure will finally make you worthy of love. In 2023, just a year before she died, Jocelyn finally admitted the truth. "I only wish I had believed in myself more." She didn't die because she was poor. She died because she spent her entire life, from that first surgery in 1979 to her final breath in 2024, chasing validation from people who were incapable of giving it. The media turned her into a punchline, but behind the surgically altered mask was a woman who experienced profound betrayal and heartbreak. Yet, she survived. She showed a strange kind of defiance by refusing to hide, continuing to attend fashion shows and dress in designer clothes despite the whispers. Her story serves as a haunting reminder of the cost of obsession and the cruelty of a society that criticizes women for aging, then ridicules them for trying to stay young. Jocelyn was caught in that impossible bind, but her resilience to keep living and finding love after losing everything is a strength that shouldn't be dismissed. In the end, Jocelyn died in Paris, the city where her grand adventure began decades ago as a Swiss girl with big dreams. She lived an extraordinary life, made terrible mistakes, and somehow still managed to become an icon. But her real tragedy wasn't the lost billions. It was that she spent 70 years believing her worth depended on someone else's approval. Perhaps for the first time in 40 years, she finally slept peacefully, without worrying if her face was enough. Death, ironically, was her final freedom. Tonight, when you look in the mirror and see the lines of time on your face, smile. Those lines are evidence of a real life, not a bitter legal settlement. Happiness doesn't lie in someone else's eyes. It lies in your ability to be at peace with who you see. If you still have someone to trust, if you can still boil an egg and make yourself a meal, and if you know exactly who is looking back at you in the mirror, you are already wealthier than Jocelyn Wildenstein ever was, because the only prison worse than poverty is the one you build for yourself. Whether Jocelyn was a victim of society or her own choices is for you to decide. But remember this: the face you are born with might age, but the face you buy will cost you everything. Everything.